You know that feeling? It's the one that hits you square in the gut when you're standing at a crossroads.
Hmm.
On one path, there's the easy way out, maybe a shortcut, right? A loophole you spotted that could save you time or money or hassle.
Yeah, maybe even lead to some pretty sweet rewards personally.
Exactly. But then there's that other path,
Mm.
the one that just feels intrinsically right.
Even if it's harder.
Yeah, way harder sometimes. It's the path aligned with your values, your sense of integrity, even if it demands sacrifice, and offers absolutely no guarantee of an external reward waiting for you.
No pat on the back, no bonus.
Not even recognition sometimes. We've all wrestled with this, haven't we? We find ourselves wondering, often kind of privately, does doing the right thing, the moral thing, actually pay off for me? Is there a personal benefit to being good beyond just, avoiding the sting of guilt?
It's such a fundamental human tension, isn't it? This perceived conflict between, well, self-interest and morality. For centuries, philosophy, even just common wisdom, has sometimes framed the right thing as something you do despite your own desires, like a kind of noble sacrifice that might leave you personally worse off, or at least no better off in any tangible way.
Exactly. And that long-standing intuition is precisely why the source material for this deep dive grabbed our attention immediately. We've been spending time with an article published in Psychology Today, Australia.
Okay.
It's titled, Good People Are Happier, and This Is Why. The author is Kevin Bennett, PhD, and it was updated very recently, actually, June 3, 2025, reviewed by Libby Ma.
So pretty current thinking.
Very current. And what makes this particular article so compelling and, frankly, a bit counterintuitive for many of us is that it delves into new research that directly addresses this exact question. It puts this ancient tension to a modern scientific test.
And the core finding that this article highlights, which the researchers lay out quite clearly, right up front, well, it really challenges that common intuition. This new research suggests, quite compellingly, that the answer to that question, does being moral pay off for you, is a resounding yes.
Yes.
Yes. Moral people are, in fact, consistently found to be happier.
Wow. Which, as you said, kind of flies in the face of the idea that being strictly moral might mean you're, I don't know, a doormat, or that the world's just set up for people willing to cut corners.
Exactly. It suggests there might be this profound alignment between ethical behavior and, well, personal well-being.
Okay. So our mission for this deep dive is to peel back the layers of this finding, based strictly on what this Psychology Today article presents. We want to understand how this connection between morality and happiness was identified by the researchers, according to the source.
You're right, so how?
Explore the proposed reasons why this link exists, and consider what the implications might be for our own lives and the way we view those difficult moral choices.
So it's a deep dive into the reported link between goodness and well-being, guided by the specific insights and research discussed in this particular article. Let's unpack this then. And the article gives us a perfect entry point, actually, by starting with a very relatable scenario, an anecdote about a college student named Daphne.
Okay, let's really lean into this opening story because it captures the essence of the dilemma so well. The article introduces us to Daphne, who is a college sophomore.
Mm-hmm.
The scene is late at night, specifically noted as 11:47 p.m., just hours before a massive final exam.
Tyler.
You know, the one that can significantly impact your GPA.
Oh, yeah. High stakes.
Totally. She's exhausted, frayed, probably running on caffeine and nerves, staring at her laptop screen. And her heart, the article says, is absolutely racing. Why? Because she stumbled upon something she shouldn't have.
Uh-oh.
In her class group chat, someone has shared a Google Doc, and that document contains, well, the answers to the final exam.
Wow. Okay. The temptation in that moment must be just immense. Daphne's GPA is on the knife edge.
Yeah.
Her academic future feels tied to this one test. She knows with absolute certainty that if she just clicks on that document, if she just takes a look, she could secure an A, maybe effortlessly.
Yeah.
And the article adds a crucial detail. No one would ever know.
Right. The perfect, untraceable shortcut. Seems too good to pass up, especially when you're stressed and tired.
Absolutely.
But the hesitation, the internal struggle the article describes, is just as powerful as the temptation. Her stomach twists like a physical manifestation of that inner conflict.
You could almost feel it.
Right. She's not just weighing an A against her current grade. She's thinking about a whole web of connections and values. She's thinking about her parents, maybe whose hopes are tied to her success. She's thinking about the professor, someone who knows her face, who she interacts with, and she's thinking about her desired self-image, the kind of person she, believes she is or, wants to be.
That internal debate, the clash between immediate, potentially huge personal gain and that deeper, maybe less defined sense of what's right, that's the absolute heart of her dilemma right there.
Yeah.
It's a classic moral test, really, just played out in a very contemporary setting. The pressure of the exam, the perceived lack of accountability in the digital space, it just concentrates that moral conflict into a single high-stakes decision point.
And her decision, according to the article, it's simple, kind of understated, but profoundly significant. In the end, the source says, she closes the tab and heads to bed, exhausted.
She didn't cheat.
She didn't cheat. Now, the immediate external academic result, well, she didn't ace the exam. The article's clear on that. She sacrificed the potential guaranteed perfect score.
Right.
But, and this is the critical turning point in the anecdote as presented by the source, she felt something else. A surprising sense of peace.
Peace, huh? Not triumph, but peace.
Exactly. The article elaborates on this feeling, describing it not as the triumphant feeling of scoring a win, but as something qualitatively different. Good, like looking yourself in the mirror and liking what you see.
That feeling of internal congruence, maybe, of integrity preserved, the source highlights that as a significant, immediate, internal reward, one that seemingly outweighed the external academic outcome she might have achieved by cheating.
Right. And that's the powerful bridge the article uses to launch into the larger discussion. Was that feeling Daphne experienced, that peace, that sense of liking herself, that inner harmony, was that just a fleeting psychological consequence of avoiding guilt? Or is that kind of difficult, unseen moral choice, that commitment to living by your values, even when it costs you something tangible, actually linked to something more enduring and significant? Long-term happiness and overall psychological well-being.
And this is where the research discussed in the source comes in. The article states directly that a new body of work from a team of psychologists provides a robust yes answer to this very question.
A definitive yes.
It seems so. It suggests that the connection isn't just about avoiding the negative feeling of guilt in the short term, but about something much deeper and more pervasive, intrinsically tied to our character, our connections with others, and our overall psychological health. It's not just about feeling good about a specific action. It seems to be about a deeper state of being.
Okay, so if this research is saying that being a moral person is linked to being happier, the immediate question that leads to mind is, how on earth do you measure something as inherently complex, as culturally nuanced, and as seemingly subjective as moral character in a rigorous scientific way?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question in this kind of research.
The source acknowledges this challenge right off the bat, right?
Absolutely. This is often the first hurdle in psychological research dealing with these abstract concepts like personality or character. The article highlights the significant difficulty in measuring morality. It notes that if you simply use a self-report questionnaire asking people, do you consider yourself a moral person? Or how honest are you? The data you get might be heavily skewed.
Right, because who's going to say, no, I'm terrible?
Exactly. Most of us, understandably and maybe optimistically, would rate ourselves fairly highly on such traits. Self-perception, especially regarding our own virtue, can be quite unreliable due to biases, social desirability, maybe even just a lack of true self-awareness in certain areas.
We might intend to be moral.
But our actual behavior might not always reflect that intention day to day.
Okay, so the researchers needed a way to get a more objective, or at least less biased, look at someone's morality. And the source describes the innovative method they employed, which they term a reputation-based approach.
This is where the methodology itself becomes a key insight from the article.
How'd that work?
Precisely. Instead of relying on individuals to rate their own moral character, the researchers turned to the people who interact with them on a regular basis, their peers.
Ah, okay. Other people's perspectives.
Yes. They surveyed friends, coworkers, colleagues, classmates, even casual acquaintances of the subjects being studied. The logic here, as explained in the article, is that while we might present a curated version of ourselves or hold a biased view of our own goodness, the people who experience our behavior day to day have a more grounded, reality-tested perspective on our actions and traits.
And what were these peers specifically asked to rate? Was it just a general, is this person good?
No, it was more specific than that. The article lists the concrete moral traits they focused on. They weren't asking abstract questions about moral philosophy. They were asking about observable, everyday behaviors. Honesty, fairness, kindness, and dependability.
Okay, does make sense. Honesty, fairness, kindness, dependability, things you can actually see in how someone acts.
Yes, traits that manifest in how you treat people in meetings, how you handle shared resources, how you respond when someone needs help, or whether you follow through on your commitments. Real world stuff. And this focus on peer perception of concrete behaviors is why the source argues this reputation-based method offers a more realistic look at morality. It shifts the focus from internal intentions or abstract principles to how our everyday behavior affects others.
So it's less about claiming to be good and more about being seen as good through your consistent actions and interactions, measuring the impact of your character.
You got it. It measures the impact of your character on your social environment.
That makes a lot of sense. Your reputation for morality is built on those cumulative, observable actions. Okay, so they had this method asking peers to rate specific moral traits like honesty, fairness, kindness, and dependability. Where did they apply this method? Who did they study?
Well, the research discussed in the source wasn't confined to a single narrow population, which is really important for the strength of the findings.
Generalizability.
Exactly. The study spanned 3 distinct populations, adding layers of validation. First, they looked at American college students, a common starting point for psych research, but potentially limited in life experience. Then, to broaden the scope culturally and professionally, they also studied Chinese professionals. These 2 groups alone offer considerable diversity in terms of culture, age, and life stage.
Okay, U.S. students and Chinese professionals. And the third group mentioned in the source sounds particularly targeted.
It is, yeah. The third group involved people who were deliberately nominated by others as being either the most or the least moral people they personally knew.
Wow. So they asked people to point out the saints and sinners they knew, essentially.
Well, maybe not quite that dramatic, but yes, basically identifying individuals at the extreme ends of the moral spectrum as perceived by those closest to them. It's a powerful way to see if the effects hold for individuals widely recognized for their high or low moral standing in their communities.
Wow. Nominating the most and least moral people you know.
Mm.
That feels like a very direct way to get at peer perception in a real-world context. And what did they consistently find across these 3 very different groups? Was there a pattern?
That's the key takeaway highlighted by the source. The consistency of the findings. It was quite remarkable. Across American students, Chinese professionals, and these nominated individuals, the result was strikingly similar.
Okay.
People who were rated by their peers as being more moral, as demonstrating higher levels of honesty, fairness, kindness, and dependability, consistently reported higher levels of overall well-being and a greater sense of life meaning
Consistently.
across all 3.
Consistently. This wasn't just a fleeting correlation. It was a consistent pattern across diverse populations.
So it seems that regardless of your cultural background, whether you're just starting out in college or you're established in a career, the source uses examples like a straight-A nursing student or a mid-career engineer.
Right, covering different fields, too.
Being perceived by the people around you as a moral person appears strongly linked to feeling better about your life and finding it more meaningful. And what makes this finding particularly robust, according to the article, is that the researchers took steps to isolate this link between morality and happiness from other potential influencing factors.
Controlling for variables.
Exactly. They controlled for several variables that might offer alternative explanations for why someone is happy. They controlled for religiosity, for instance.
Okay, why religiosity?
Well, to ensure the link wasn't simply because religious people might tend to be more involved in supportive communities and might report higher well-being for that reason rather than morality itself.
I see. Makes sense.
They also controlled for likability, trying to distinguish just being generally popular or easygoing from being seen as specifically morally good.
Right, because you could be likable, but maybe not entirely ethical.
Precisely. And they also controlled for basic demographics like gender and age.
Okay, let's pause on this controlled for idea for a moment, because it's a bit technical, but really important to the study's strength, isn't it? When researchers control for something like religiosity, what does that actually mean in practice in this kind of study?
Yeah, it's crucial. Think of it like trying to isolate the effect of one ingredient in a recipe. If you want to know if adding more sugar makes a cake sweeter, you need to keep everything else the same: flour, eggs, baking time, temperature right.
Right. So, the sweetness is just from the sugar.
Exactly. So in this study, controlling for religiosity means that when they looked at the relationship between peer-rated morality and happiness, they statistically accounted for the person's level of religious belief or practice. They sort of mathematically removed its influence.
Ah, okay.
This helps ensure that the observed link between morality and happiness isn't just a side effect of people who happen to be religious, also happening to score higher on both morality and happiness for reasons related to their religiosity rather than the morality itself. They're trying to isolate the specific effect of perceived morality.
Got it. So, the association between being seen as moral and reporting higher happiness held true even after they statistically removed the influence of whether someone was religious, how generally popular or well-liked they were, their age, or their gender.
That's what the source indicates, yes.
That really strengthens the argument that there's a direct link, or at least a link independent of these common confounding factors.
It really does. The source suggests this indicates the connection isn't merely a byproduct of moral people happening to be more religious or more popular or fitting a certain demographic profile. The link between their perceived moral character and their well-being appears to stand on its own.
And the article even touched on the type of morality, right? It wasn't just one narrow definition that mattered.
Yes, that's an important nuance highlighted by the source. The researchers didn't find that only one specific facet of morality predicted happiness. The article describes two broad categories they looked at.
Right.
First, what they called kind morality, which involves traits like being compassionate, caring, and respectful, the more empathy-driven side.
And second, principled morality, which is characterized by traits like being honest, fair, and loyal. More about integrity in rules, perhaps.
Okay, kindness versus principles, roughly.
Sort of. And the finding across all populations was that both sides of this moral coin were significantly linked to higher levels of happiness and life meaning.
Interesting. So it wasn't like only the kind people were happy or only the principled people.
No, it wasn't necessary to be exclusively one or the other. The presence of these broadly defined moral traits, as perceived by one's peers, was the consistent predictor of higher well-being. Both mattered.
So it's not about fitting into some rigid, singular definition of goodness, but rather consistently demonstrating these positive, other-oriented traits in your daily interactions and decisions, whether those traits lean more towards empathy and care or towards integrity and fairness.
That seems to be the takeaway. The key is the positive impact on others and the internal consistency.
Right. Okay, so what's truly fascinating here, and where the deep dive into this research really provides the most insight, is the why. Yes, the mechanisms.
The article doesn't just stop at stating the correlation. It delves into the proposed mechanisms, the pathways through which being perceived as moral by others actually leads to greater psychological well-being. This is the core analysis, explaining how this translates into happiness.
This moves us beyond just good people are happier to understanding the engines driving that connection.
Right.
Okay, the first mechanism the source discusses is building stronger relationships.
That feels pretty intuitive, actually.
It does, but the research provides the empirical backing. The source explains that individuals who are seen as more moral by their peers tend to have stronger, higher quality relationships. And it makes sense, right? Think about it. If others consistently experience you as honest, fair, kind, and dependable, those core traits peers were rating.
Then they learn they can trust you.
Exactly. Trust, that's the key word. Trust is the absolute bedrock of any deep, meaningful relationship, isn't it?
Absolutely. If I perceive you as trustworthy and fair, I feel safe around you. I don't have to be constantly on guard wondering if you have a hidden agenda or might take advantage of me.
Precisely. That sense of safety allows for vulnerability, for genuine connection. The article points out that when people feel safe and trust you, they are more likely to open up, to share deeply, to rely on you, and importantly, to reciprocate that trust and kindness. This fosters relationships that are not just numerous, maybe, but are deeper, more supportive, and more authentic. And the source is very clear on the critical link to happiness here. It explicitly states that social connection is one of the most powerful drivers of happiness.
Yeah, we hear that a lot in psychology. Strong relationships are key.
They really are. Psychological research consistently shows that strong, supportive relationships are perhaps the single greatest predictor of long-term well-being, even more so than wealth or health beyond a certain baseline or achievement. That's a powerful connection then. It's not just about having friends, it's about the quality of those friendships, the depth of trust and safety within them. And if being moral is what builds that fundamental trust,
Then it directly taps into this major source of human happiness. It sounds like a virtuous cycle, doesn't it? Consistently moral behavior builds trust.
Hmm.
Trust allows for deeper, safer connections.
And those deeper connections are fundamentally more fulfilling and happiness-inducing.
It reframes the idea of morality not just as an obligation, maybe, but as an investment in your social capital, which in turn is an investment in your well-being.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Stronger relationships through trust. What is the second key mechanism the source identifies?
The second mechanism delves inward.
Hmm.
It's about cultivating a coherent sense of self.
Coherent sense of self. What does that mean exactly?
The source explains that when you consistently act in a way that aligns with your deepest values, making those difficult ethical choices even when it's hard, like Daphne did with the exam answers.
Right. You reinforce your own identity. Your actions match your internal compass.
Okay, so your outward behavior is consistent with your inward beliefs about the kind of person you are or want to be.
Exactly. The article uses a very clear phrase to capture this feeling. You feel coherent. You feel like you. There's no internal dissonance, no conflict between who you think you are and how you're acting.
That internal alignment,
Mm-hmm.
it feels like the opposite of hypocrisy or, putting on a facade. If your behavior contradicts your values, there must be a constant psychological strain, right? A kind of inner tension.
Precisely.
Hmm.
Psychologists, according to the source, link this kind of inner harmony, this congruence between values and behavior, to long-term psychological well-being. When you are living authentically in line with your values, you reduce internal conflict.
Okay.
You eliminate the stress of maintaining conflicting narratives, the person you present versus the person you are when no one is looking, and you build a stable, integrated sense of self.
Which leads to
A deeper, more resilient sense of peace and contentment than any external achievement or avoided consequence could really provide. Remember Daphne's feeling of liking what you see in the mirror?
Yeah.
That's a perfect illustration of this inner harmony in action. Her choice, though difficult academically, resolved her internal conflict and reinforced her desired self-image, leading to that sense of peace.
Okay, so the research presented in this source points to two major intertwined pathways linking perceived morality to happiness. First, building stronger, more trusting relationships with others because your behavior makes them feel safe.
For social connection.
And second, building a stronger, more integrated sense of self because your actions align with your values.
Internal coherence.
And both social connection and internal congruence are widely recognized in psychological science as fundamental pillars of well-being.
Absolutely. But what's crucial, and shows the nuance in the source's analysis, is that it doesn't present being moral as some kind of effortless path to bliss. The article is careful to acknowledge that doing the right thing isn't always easy or immediately rewarding.
That's an important point to add into the picture because we know from experience that standing up for your values or doing the difficult right thing can come with real costs sometimes.
Absolutely. The source states clearly, that doesn't mean being moral is always joyful.
Mhm.
It acknowledges the potential challenges and difficulties that moral individuals might face.
Like what?
For example, the article suggests that moral people may actually be more sensitive to suffering and injustice in the world
Oh, interesting. Why?
because they are compassionate and value fairness. Perhaps they feel the pain of others or the sting of unfairness more keenly, more deeply than someone less attuned.
Which could lead to greater distress or emotional burden compared to someone who is less bothered by such things.
Potentially, yes. The source also mentions they may worry more about ethical choices.
Mm-hmm. The burden of choosing right.
Yeah. Every decision point, especially in complex situations, might involve more careful deliberation, more agonizing over potential consequences, leading to increased anxiety or rumination compared to someone who simply optimizes for personal gain or convenience.
And there can be external costs too, right?
Definitely. The source mentions, importantly in real-world terms, that they may experience backlash for standing up for what's right,
For sure.
for challenging unethical behavior, or for refusing to participate in something they view as wrong, especially when the prevailing culture or powerful individuals are doing otherwise.
That feels very true to life. Sometimes being moral means being unpopular or facing resistance or even punishment for not going along with the easy or profitable wrong. That's a real cost.
It is a real cost. Still, and this is where the research findings circles back powerfully, the data discussed in the source suggests that these challenges and potential costs, while real and sometimes significant, they are ultimately outweighed by the benefits.
Outweighed. How so?
The article reiterates the long-term positive outcomes identified: deeper relationships, clearer purpose, and a sense of integrity.
So even if there are moments of increased sensitivity, worry, or external conflict associated with being moral, the cumulative lasting psychological rewards, the richness of your connections, the clarity of your sense of purpose derived from living your values, and that solid feeling of integrity seem to provide a more profound and durable foundation for happiness that tips the scales in the long run.
That appears to be the conclusion from the research presented. And going back to Daphne one last time, her choice not to cheat didn't guarantee her an academic win. The article notes she didn't ace the exam.
Right, so it didn't preserve her academic record in the sense of getting a perfect score on that specific test.
No, but as the source emphasizes, it preserved her self-respect, that internal validation, that sense of inner harmony and integrity she felt looking in the mirror. It's framed by the source as the enduring reward that ultimately outweighed the external academic difficulty she faced by choosing the harder ethical path. It wasn't the easy way to an A, but it was the path that aligned with her values, and that alignment yielded a different, perhaps deeper, kind of payoff.
It crystallizes the idea that the payoff for morality might not always be in conventional external metrics like grades or promotions, but in the fundamental building blocks of psychological well-being itself.
Exactly.
So bringing it all together, the core message from the Psychology Today article and the research describes is a powerful one, isn't it? It really challenges that common intuition about morality being solely a sacrifice.
It reiterates the main finding. Doing the right thing, particularly as it manifests in how you treat others and maintain your own integrity, even in private moments when you think no one is watching. Well, it can indeed lead to lasting and significant psychological rewards. It's not just about avoiding the negative, it seems to be about actively building the positive.
And the article is careful, as we mentioned, not to set an impossibly high bar.
Yeah.
You don't have to strive for some idealized, saintly perfection to experience these benefits, right?
No, definitely not. The core requirement for tapping into this link, according to the conclusion of the article, is framed in a very accessible way. It's about consistency in everyday behavior.
Okay.
The article suggests you just need to show up in your life with honesty, compassion, and courage.
Honesty, compassion, courage.
Yeah, these aren't abstract ideals. They're actionable traits. Honesty relates to fairness and integrity, compassion fuels kindness, and courage enables dependability, allowing you to stand up for your values and commitments even when it's challenging.
And those traits directly echo the very qualities the researchers had peers rate.
Exactly. Honesty, fairness, compassion, dependability, courage. It reinforces the idea that it's the demonstration of these traits in your interactions that matters.
So it's about the cumulative effect of those daily decisions and behaviors, how you interact with your colleagues, your friends, even strangers, and ensuring your actions are consistent with your inner sense of what is right. It's in the consistent practice, not just the occasional grand gesture. That consistent practice, as perceived by others and felt internally, builds the stronger relationships and the more coherent self that the research links to happiness.
Exactly. It's about those seemingly small, unseen choices adding up over time to create a foundation of trust, integrity, and inner peace, which together contribute to a greater, more enduring sense of well-being and meaning in your life. Validated both by your own internal experience and, it seems, by the perception of those around you.
Okay, so to recap our deep dive into this Psychology Today article, it presents compelling new research suggesting a strong, empirically supported link between being perceived as moral by your peers and experiencing higher levels of happiness and life meaning.
Right. A clear correlation found.
The study used that innovative reputation-based method, moving beyond potentially unreliable self-reports, and found this link consistently across diverse groups, American students, Chinese professionals, and individuals nominated for high-low morality.
And that consistency is key.
And it held up even after statistically controlling for factors like religiosity, likability, gender, and age.
Strengthening the core finding.
The article proposes that this connection is primarily driven by two key mechanisms: fostering stronger, safer, more trusting relationships built on dependable, fair, and kind behavior,
The social connection piece.
and cultivating a coherent, integrated sense of self by consistently acting in line with your values, leading to inner harmony.
The internal coherence piece.
And while acknowledging that being moral isn't always easy and can involve sensitivity, worry, or even backlash,
Yeah, the downsides are real.
the source argues that the data suggests the long-term psychological benefits, deeper connections, clearer purpose, unwavering integrity, ultimately outweigh the potential difficulties.
It truly offers a scientific lens on that age-old question of whether goodness is its own reward, suggesting that the reward is deeply embedded in our psychological architecture and our social fabric, not just some abstract concept.
This brings us back to you, the listener, and those moments of difficult choice in your own life. How does understanding the findings presented in this article, that being perceived as moral by others by showing up with honesty, compassion, and courage, is linked to those fundamental drivers of happiness, like stronger relationships and a more coherent sense of self? How does that influence how you think about those decisions?
Yeah, it's a practical question, isn't it? If, as this source suggests, a powerful measure of our morality and thus a predictor of our happiness is rooted in how our everyday behavior consistently affects others, does truly internalizing this research shift our focus at all?
How so?
Does it perhaps encourage us to place less emphasis on judging our intentions privately, I meant well, and more emphasis on the tangible impact of our actions on the people around us?
From internal intention to external impact. Interesting.
Or considering those moments when being moral is genuinely hard, where there might be real costs or increased worry, does recognizing the potential for that profound long-term psychological reward, that deeper well-being, that unshakable sense of integrity, does that make those difficult moral choices feel less like sacrifices you make despite yourself?
Right.
And maybe more like essential, wise investments in your own deepest, most authentic, and ultimately happiest self?
Something to ponder, definitely.
Yeah.
Food for thought the next time you find yourself standing at that crossroads.